Yeah.
All right, Miss Garris. Ooh, that looks delicious too. Is that goat cheese?
Yeah,
It's really good.
it's good.
Cool. So we will start today by, I pulled up your lesson 1 for unit 2. And we're going to just look at the student writing for this lesson, specifically how they did on the last question of the exit ticket. But before that, just to celebrate quite a few things that you've done with your work with theme. Out of all your kids, literally 78 out of 80-ish kids, all but 2 were able to say a theme from the text. Like every single kid in their response had a theme. And then there were only 10 kids in the entire grade that didn't have a theme that was 100% accurate. Or
They are still including character elements.
Yeah, so it was either it was a little bit too specific, or it was just a little bit off and didn't apply. Yeah. But just stopping to celebrate you in that. So almost 98% of your kids know what a theme is, and almost 90% of them know how to determine a theme on their own from a text. So what led to that success, and what will be the impact of that work with theme?
I think that they have seen theme a lot at this point. Part of it is just seeing that again and again. And then I think too, so many of them were able to do how the author developed it because of the work that we've done with literary analysis tasks. Cool.
And just knowing what will the impact of that be when they go to take the park assessment coming up, and just in their lives, what will the impact be?
On part, immediately knowing what to do when they see a question about theme or how author develops it, which I remember the first time I saw questions like that, I didn't feel really confident answering them.
As the adult?
Yeah. How would I approach this question?
Yeah.
So I'm excited that they hopefully will not be feeling that way.
Good. Yeah, and it was a big deal. And that was, even as we go through them today, high to low, you'll see that common trend that every kid could do that, which is really exciting.
Yeah,
it's great.
Cool.
So we are going to dive into some student work in a second. Cool. I know that we've looked at this standard before, but let's just quickly review standard 7.2. What do kids need to know and be able to do in order to break down this standard?
Yeah, they have to. Do you want us to write it, or do you want us to talk about
Yeah, we've done it before, so if you want to just share out what we've talked about before.
Sure. They have to know on the most basic level, what the text is about. They have to know what a theme is. They have to know, then they have to be able to put those two things together. What's the theme of this text that we're reading? And then to even know how to approach that question about the development of the course of the text, giving them the scaffolds that we've given them.
Yeah. What about, you said know what a theme is?
You know the definition of a theme, or the 7th grade definition of a theme, that it's a lesson that the character teaches you in a story.
Yeah, and it's universal, and it's one sentence that can apply to anything in life. What about the be able to do? In order to truly understand how a theme is developed, what do kids need to be able to do?
They have to. I think it's interesting because it's actually harder for kids to say how the author develops it than it is for them to say what the theme is. But they only know what it is if they can track how the author develops it.
Yeah, it's a vicious little cycle. Yeah.
And so if they can see this character changes from this way to this way, then that will lead them to the theme. Or if they can see this character makes a mistake and I shouldn't make the same mistake, that will lead them to the theme. All these different things that the author is doing, they can pick up on those. As readers, they can get to the theme.
Yeah. And you picked up on something being able to trace and develop.
Yeah.
You only get to the theme at the end because you saw
you had a different
how
starting
something
point,
happened in the beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
So I think that is something to keep in mind as we go through the student work here. So let's quickly look at the exemplar from the classwork and just go through. I coded it for us for each different part of the standard we talked about. So red would just be the universal sentence, large moral learned from the text. Green is evidence, paraphrased, or direct quote. And then the yellow is any analysis on how theme was developed. So take a second, just reread the exemplar. Think about how does it show mastery of the standard?
Yeah, I think what's so what we want, I feel I want to push kids towards in this exemplar is that alternating structure of yellow, green, like yellow, and then like piece of evidence to support it. Claim about how the author develops it, evidence to support it.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of them like don't have this nuanced of an understanding. Like I feel like I've been scaffolding for them or starting them off with like at first, but then.
Yeah.
And I feel like this like multi-step, like not just beginning end, but like more of a nuanced understanding of how the plot develops will help them check like, oh, at this moment, the author was developing a theme by.
Yeah. And like in this example, it's kind of like first introduced, then further, and then finally developed. So it kind of goes in this beginning, middle end kind of function of how we develop a theme.
Yeah.
And you notice at the end is like overall the theme is fully developed when he finally runs away. Just keep that in your mind as we go through, and like as you think about the gap between this and like the level of the standard versus what kids are doing.
Right.
Because they're really, like in a lot of examples, really, really close to it,
Yeah.
and there's just some small tweaks we can do. So with that in mind, let's look at sweet little Ricardo, Ricardo and Kamaya's, and think about as you reread through these examples, like what it is that they're able to do in regards to the standard and the exemplar, and then what their biggest gap is.
I feel like it's a lot about structure. Like,
What do you mean?
like it's clear that Ricardo is able to say like at the beginning it was this way, and then like at the end it was this way. But like the gap between this and this is that like he's not giving enough examples of how the author develops it at that moment. But like if he had another quotation in between like these two sentences, it would be a lot closer to this already.
Yeah. And his really was like his stems here started off the book. And then ends the book. And then this last sentence of like develops this theme by. Like he was definitely the closest to reaching this.
Yeah.
But you're right, it isn't really structured in the same way of like developed here in the beginning, developed here in the middle, and fully developed at the end.
I think that he could, like, if I had, like, been clear that this is what I wanted to see, like, easily could have done it.
To push it
And I
back,
think lots of them, actually.
Yeah. What about Kamaya? Like, what similarities do you see there?
Yeah. Kamaya's structure is, like, also off. Like, that she's giving those examples. Like, those examples would all be more, more powerful if they were paired directly with, like, one way that the author develops the theme. Because, like, you're getting all this information before she explains, like, how the author uses that. I feel like this is, Kamaya and Ricardo's, like, I'm not worried about them being able to do this. I feel like this is actually closer to, like, the writing standard.
Yeah.
Like, actually about organization and sequence of ideas, less than, like, what they understand or don't understand about theme.
Yeah. And it's interesting that both of them, too, also put this, the author develops this theme by, at the very end.
Yeah.
That's something you'll notice that all kids are doing. So as far as, like, the concept of how a theme is developed, what would you say their biggest gap is? And, like, understanding the concept. Yeah. Like, the conceptual gap of theme development. They don't understand blank. What would you say?
I feel like they're missing the fact that like the theme is developed over the course of the entire story. So like they're just picking out 2 data points, beginning, end. And they like are missing that they need to support with evidence. And I actually feel like that is about, they're missing that like the author chooses that. Like I feel like that's a lack of conceptual understanding that the author makes these choices intentionally.
Yeah. And even though they have that sentence stem and like what we've been giving them, it's not fully.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say.
It's not fully there, especially because they're missing that middle part, and especially because like the author chose this for a reason.
Right. And I think it's interesting too because like in essays where they're writing on theme, they can pull out like different pieces of evidence, and so like you would think that that would trigger, like, oh, this happens over the course of the entire story. But I feel like that those dots, like, haven't been connected yet.
Yeah. Let's quickly look, keeping that in mind, quickly look through the medium pieces of student work and thinking about what is the gap, like what can they all do, like what common trends do you see, and then what would be the gap between the high and then this group.
Mm-hmm.
And to narrow our focus, just look at the yellow in all of these, which will be fun.
I mean, I think something that's interesting about the yellow is that, like, some of them are specific and some of them are more general. Like, some of them are saying, like, this author develops the theme, like, by telling Frederick Douglass's actions and thoughts throughout the whole story.
Yeah,
And then some of them are just, like,
the stem.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's really great here, like what are all kids in this section?
They're including it.
Okay, they're including that statement in general, which is
Mhm.
great. What else can they do?
Um,
Like looking at the red.
name a theme.
Yeah,
for the
an
most
accurate
part.
theme too.
Mhm.
And this was like the 70 of 8, like this was the majority of your
Yeah,
kids
yeah.
all in this bucket.
Mm-hmm.
So just like I want to just also recognize like that's huge. Like kids all have an accurate theme and they're all attempting to talk about development, but what would you say is the biggest gap with this group of kids? And this is probably where our reteach will come from this group.
Like, there's like not a lot of green on this page. They're not
Mhm.
supporting that theme or
So
the
their
development
evidence.
of theme with evidence.
Yeah. And then so the evidence part is easy, but what
Mhm.
about the development of theme itself is missing? Again, like what is the concept that they're probably just not understanding?
That it's like developed throughout the whole story.
And if you look at Calvin's, like
Mm-hmm.
the author develops a theme by creating a character who
From the
changes
beginning
from
to
beginning to end,
Yeah.
but he doesn't like, okay, well, how?
Yeah.
Like, that's a simple, like, how, push your analysis.
Right.
And so that entire, the thing you said about like through the entire
Yeah.
text is really huge here.
I think Linnea's, like, by telling Frederick Douglass's actions and thoughts throughout the whole story, like, that would be a good one where, like, look, we get his thoughts not just at the beginning and the end, but, like, we get his thoughts in the middle, too.
Mhm.
And we should include those.
Yeah,
You know?
especially because the work they did with that was with the plot diagram,
Yeah.
and so they could easily see
Yeah, like,
how
them
the
to
theme
pull
is
stuff,
developed throughout. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because it's like at the beginning, like the character was this way. In the middle, they faced problems like this, and then like at the end, the problems were resolved like this.
Yeah.
Like
And
not
we
to make
fully
it super
develop it.
formulaic,
Yeah.
but that's like sort of what it is.
Mm-hmm. And then very quickly looking at the low student work, this is, I want to just note that this group is very different, and this was not the majority at all. So there were kind of two categories that the low group fell into, and I chunked them that way. So just quickly looking at, like this would be someone you would do like multiple laps with an aggressive
Mhm.
monitoring or pull them at a separate time, but of these 4 kids, like what would you say is the biggest gap here? Just take a second, look through.
Yeah, like the themes aren't good.
Yeah.
Either like they're not a theme because they include like a detail about the character and aren't widely applicable, or like this is like overly general. And I find it hard to say like no, like that's not a correct theme.
Yeah.
You know, because like lessons can teach or stories can teach
Yeah.
different lessons, right? But like this isn't the main one that I would expect you to
Yeah.
pull out, and that makes me worry that like you didn't understand the text.
Especially like the having a bad day, like
Yeah.
you could go really deep there. with,
I think
like,
it's just like I didn't understand this. Like this seems like
a
something
generic thing.
that it would be about.
So these are just, and like with Nazir, that's a simple, like, hey bud, like a theme is this. Like,
I know.
you know, like he was one of like the only kids, like of the 2, like out of the 78, like it was these last 2 that were just like completely, like Nazir didn't include one. But I mean, this was such a small portion of kids that
Yeah.
it's not, this would just be a smaller group that you would pull.
Mm-hmm.
But even what's amazing about this is that